Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special Saturday edition of Vox Vomitus. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series. With me today, as always, are my Vox Vomitus vixens, Trisha Ridinger McKee, author of the Beyond series, and Alison Martine, author of the Bourbon books. Today we have a very special guest with us all the way from fancy London. I almost just did a bad accent. I will try not to. Author Elisabeth Gifford. Welcome, Elisabeth.
Thank you for having me.
I am proud of myself for not going into a Tiny Tim accent when I introduced you.
Please don't.
Now I might at some point.
We're proud of you too.
Elisabeth, thank you for being here. Can you tell us and our audience and our viewers a little bit about yourself and about your work?
Well, I've been writing for about 10 years. After I taught for quite a few years, children with dyslexia mostly. And then I started to do various classes and courses in creative writing because I just found it very interesting, and the children were getting older and didn't really need so much input. So I was enjoying some classes, a diploma, and then I did a master's in London with a really nice group of people, one of whom was a very nice American girl called Elisabeth Gifford. And we each prepared a novel and had a really great time. And about another year or so later, when I'd really got the book ready, and so had they, we put them all together in a sort of leaflet and sent them out to, I think, all the agents in London, including a couple who'd passed away. And
they're not going to represent you if you're
yeah. And so we organised an event and had some wine and things and did some readings. And I think quite a few of us got an agent from that event. And
I love that you all bonded together and did this together as a team.
Yeah.
And is that Elisabeth, is that how you got signed?
Yes. That's how I find
like a fairy tale.
It is a fairy tale.
Yeah. Well, I think actually all these master's courses, I think agents do keep half an ear open because they know, they just know that you put a lot of work into something.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, it's having a finished project that the agent can sell that's kind of fundamental, really. So
when you're doing a master's in literature, because was it in creative writing or literature? What was the specific focus?
This was creative writing. Your project was to start writing a novel.
That's amazing. Yeah, my husband has his master's, and so he has a master's thesis all polished and nice, but no one's going to polish it. Nobody's going to read that because it's about education and technology, and it's definitely an
I'm already bored.
thing. Well, it's teachers, that's perfect for them. But the idea that creating something that the wider world actually wants to read and it's applicable to everyone, not just people in that specific discipline. I love the idea of making the master's something practical that way and accessible.
Yeah, it's quite a craft-based master's, really. I think it's a bit like doing a sort of art course where you're sort of creating something. And I mean, I think it's best to go into it because you enjoy it. And then if you do get, a book deal, that's a bonus. But it was great. Yeah, I loved it.
So you have kind of like classmates that got agents at the same time. Did they all find publication deals around the same time? So do you have like a crop of?
Yes. Yeah, I think there were about 6 of us. And I think we didn't all quite follow the same route. One lady went back into publishing. One wrote one very good book and then went into farming.
Are we back to the chickens and the goats again? Chicken and goat yoga. So who knows what they're doing?
Yeah. One lady.
It's such an incredibly bonding experience.
It can be. I think the main thing is that you're supportive. I think there was another group where people tended to take offence and they kind of fell out. So we were lucky that we were a quite sort of easygoing group. But I think it's harder when you're very young and you go into, say, do a creative writing course, because so much rides on it. Whereas I think when you're slightly more established, you know, it's not the only string in your bow, and you're more sort of sanguine about it, really. Yes, so we had a good time. One lady, quite a few people published, but they haven't necessarily made it their whole life. They also do other things, you know, started families, got married, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So your debut novel that got published, that's the one you wrote as your master's.
Yes.
And what is the title of that book called?
That's called Secrets of the Sea House, and it's a sort of mystery historical novel, but it's actually based on an interesting legend from the Scottish Islands about mermaid sightings. And it's based on a real letter in the Times reporting a mermaid sighting. And so what's behind that, and also the Selkie legend, where a seal person comes on shore and takes their sealskin off, was actually based probably on Sami kayakers from Norway, who would come over in sealskin canoes and sealskin outfits, and then they'd sort of take them off when they reached Scotland. So it was quite an interesting way of retaining Scottish history and myth while having a lot of fun writing about a place I love.
So, and that's a big, I'd say probably tonal change from your book, The Good Doctor of Warsaw. Am I getting the title correct?
Yes, yes.
Which is that's heavy material.
Yes, that was quite a project. I wanted to do it for a long time, but it took me a while, about 10 years actually, to work up to it. And that came out of my teaching, in that I went to a course and heard about Dr. Korczak and some quotes from the lecture, and I thought, you know, that's just the best advice I've ever had as a mother and a teacher. And I really felt it was quite life-changing. So I started researching Dr. Korczak and his advice on, you know, respecting children and treating them as people while helping them grow into who they're meant to be, rather than sort of crushing them with this, you know, you must be perfect, you must be, you know, wonderful and get all the top grades. So he was more into get to know your child and help them be who they're meant to be. And he had a fantastic relationship. He was a bachelor, never married, none of his own children, but he had a fantastic father relationship with about 200 children at one time, because he just knew them. So I started researching that and came across the son of a young couple who had lived in the Warsaw Ghetto with Dr. Korczak, and they'd been some of the 1% out of 500,000 to survive the ghetto. And so I started to get to know Rome and went over to Sweden and visited him. And he told me where to go in Warsaw to see the places where it had all happened. And through him, I was able to frame this story through his parents' love story. And of course, although it's a very tragic story about prejudice and some of the darkest times of last century, it also has a wonderful message of hope, because there are thousands of people across the world who follow Dr. Korczak. And in fact, I went over to Seattle before lockdown and joined in with the Janusz Korczak Worldwide Association, which was held in Seattle by the American branch. But there are people there from Russia, Ukraine, Brazil, Israel, Poland. I mean, all the places you think don't get on. Well, they all come together and have a blast talking about children and Dr. Korczak.
Did you feel a certain amount of pressure to make sure you told the story the right way?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was, in fact, I wrote the book so factually to begin with that the publisher said, you know, we can't read this, it's unreadable. please could you go back and write it as a novel? And in fact, people can't really take in a lot of information without that storyline and that sort of description. So although I very carefully stuck to the facts and filled in from research, it was written as a novel in the end. Historical fiction.
It sounds like the first draft was almost a textbook, which would have been very helpful if you were doing your own research paper, but wouldn't be as accessible for someone who just wants to feel the story and do all of that.
Yes, and it's surprisingly hard to read. It's it would be better in a way to do a non-fiction book because you get more analysis and sort of colour from that. So that was an interesting one. But I did feel a quite crushing responsibility to keep to the facts, and also Roman, the couple's son, also felt a great responsibility to correct me if I did anything incorrect. So I've now been told by a Holocaust professor that it's actually a very accurate book.
Okay.
Then that's huge.
Well, and normally, when we think of historical fiction, when you're dealing with something that happened several hundred years ago, I know lots of people like to write about the Tudor age. You don't have descendants from 1 or 2 generations out saying, no, this isn't the way my mom and dad told me the story, or great Uncle Henry, that's not how he really acted. You have people who are still living this as part of their lives. So, you know, that must have been a huge responsibility to do it correctly. But then to be told, you got it, that has to feel just amazing to know that you did it justice.
Yes, it was. That was a great thing. And but yeah, I was absolutely shattered by the time I finished. And
it must have been emotionally exhausting.
Yes, it was. I have to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, our show is about honesty. Our show, we call it Vox Vomitus because we talk about not just our successes, but we talk about when we write things that don't quite click, the mistakes we make, the process of being a writer. So I guess I would ask you, did you have a lot of you wrote it first very factually, and then you added the novelization, the love story. Did you have a lot of false starts with the fictionality of it? Did you know immediately how to take the novel part of the story, or did you struggle with finding where the story would be, the heart?
I enjoy doing that sort of creative writing, so I felt quite released actually to go off and do my thing. So I think the publisher was quite surprised that I was thinking, oh yes, I'll enjoy doing this. So in fact, I did enjoy the creative writing process. Unfortunately, by then I'd done lots of research and visited Warsaw, and I felt ready to go. So it was. I found it quite interesting, sort of doing that side.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I've just finished a book set in the Hebrides, which are the islands of Scotland, and the most remote island in the UK is called St Kilda, and it had a very special community there who were evacuated in the 30s. So I've just finished that book. That book's out. And now I'm writing a book about the Dundee whaling fleet, and also about a castle that I know quite well. I don't know if I've got a picture of it. A very beautiful Scottish castle in Fife. So I'm doing a story there, and about the connection with the Dundee whalers and the Inuit community in the Arctic. That's a sort of history, love story.
So you have a strong connection to Scotland, because we keep hearing, oh, this one was in Scotland. I love Scotland. What is it about Scotland or the Scottish people that draws you so much to explore their history through story?
Well, my family's part Scottish. My husband's Scottish, so we spend quite a lot of time there. I have Scottish grandsons, but I think I'm actually from an Irish background, and one way and another, there's just no link to my sort of Celtic history. I think I don't even know who my Irish ancestors were, because all the records were blown up in the Easter Rising. So when we started going up to the Hebrides, the Gaelic culture there is still quite intact. They speak Scottish Gaelic, and the stories are quite present. And it's very undeveloped, and it's how I always imagined Ireland would be. So I sort of felt a thing about preserving some of the history there, having felt it was a pity I'd lost my own, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's just very lovely. It's beautiful.
Well, and losing your own connection there, that's heartbreaking to hear that the records were lost. What happened there? I'm not familiar with how that would have happened.
It was the 1912 Easter Rising. I think the Irish rebels then blew up the post office with all the records in it.
Oh, wow.
So,
Gosh,
yeah.
it's incredible. I mean, we take for granted now that we live in this age of technology where things can't be lost anymore, even if you want them to be lost.
Yeah.
Make them disappear. But even just 100 years ago, it was so ephemeral. Like things could just really all of a sudden vanish.
Yeah. And I think that's what I like about historical novel writing. You can take somebody somewhere you just can't go otherwise in a book. I mean, a film can do that too, but I think a novel can take you inside a person's head as well. Yeah.
So I too am Scottish and Irish in background. My mother is French, but when I tried to do Ancestry.com to trace my father's lineage, it just got to a certain point and then there was nothing and I never understood why. So I feel like you might have just shed a little bit of light on why there's all of a sudden nothing.
Yeah.
And I've got Irish ancestry on my dad's side as well, and I know we've been able to trace some of it back, but then at certain points you just lose records and go, well, we can only go this far back and have no clue beyond that. But I wonder how many other events like that or things like that where all records were kept in one place and one fire or one explosion just takes out everyone's ancestry from that point back.
Yeah. Or people didn't always write records down before a certain point. I mean, people would sort of know in the village who was who, but communities get recruited, that changes.
Well, and when your population's largely illiterate, you would have to have like the priest or the one person in the town who can read to be able to record all that. And if he gets sick and dies, then there you lose everything. And we don't have that now.
I think they had a character called the storyteller. He used to go from house to house and tell stories in old Irish culture. I mean, the idea of story is very,
It gives me chills. That just gave me chills. I love that. I feel like that's who you are now. You are the storyteller. We are all the storytellers.
Yes. And do you guys feel inspired by your Celtic roots in your writing?
I'm very inspired. Most of my characters tend to be Irish. So far, they've tended to be Irish. I write a lot about where I live, the general area where I live in New England, and there was a lot of Irish immigration into Boston and then up through New England. So I write about that, and I write about the French Canadian heritage because that's basically where we are. My mom was French Canadian. I grew up in a house where she spoke French, and but only when it was like secrets that I wasn't supposed to know about because I didn't speak French.
Jen, is that why your burlesque name is very French?
My burlesque name is actually my mother's maiden name.
There you go.
And the French version of basically Jennifer. So, Genevieve.
And I don't, but part of that is my family is originally from Pennsylvania and we moved out here when I was 3. So I've always kind of felt like an expatriate, even from the Pennsylvania Dutch culture, which was more my mom's side, and my dad's side had a mix of that and the Irish side. But I just wasn't told a lot of this growing up. And so I write from my own life experiences and including my family experiences, but there's almost this sense of just homogenous American or even Californian, which is really sad, but there's no connection back to that. And I love the idea of the historical accuracy of looking into that. And the only person I know in my family who's really looked into it is my sister. And she says we're related to Queen Isabella. I think she just wants to be a princess, honestly. So we can't trace otherwise back to Spain. And she's going back to Spain. And I'm going, nowhere else in our ancestry do we even have anyone from that country. So good luck there, kid. Good luck there. I got nothing.
You never know. It's not very far from Ireland to Spain. There's a big connection.
No, it isn't. And we always had joked that there were probably some Spanish pirates who crashed aboard and found some poor Irish lass, and the rest is keen history.
The rest is DNA history.
Yep, exactly.
I think there is a thing about Spanish pirates who landed on the Irish shore, isn't there? Yeah.
That's probably how we got Nice. Very long time later.
And I've used a couple different like Scottish folklore terms, and because I've used the idea of the Kelpie in one of my books,
Right.
and like a Grundilo, which is like
Grundilo.
the swamp monster of like a Scottish bog.
Oh,
But just like the
fabulous.
idea of it
Yeah.
as being something that, you know, children were scared of when they were little because their grandparents mentioned those words. So
Yeah.
as an adult, they still like think of those things.
Yes. Yeah. And there's often a lot of history behind that stuff. It's great to keep it going. Yeah.
Yeah. And I enjoyed it because what's funny is I had people reading my book say, I didn't know what a Kelpie was until you mentioned it just once and they didn't know. So then they looked it up and they were just like, that was so cool and weird. I'm like, oh, yay, learning.
And when I'd read on your bio, Elisabeth, about the Selkies, I remembered it because my parents had this. I don't know if it was from Reader's Digest or what, but it was this massive book of folklore and legends that my sister used to bring out to frighten me, because everything in it just freaked me out as a kid. But it had those in there, and the picture of the guy who looked like a standing seal, and it was a black and white sketch, and it was terrifying. So I'm hoping that the person had a terror feel to it. I didn't get the sense that it did, but personally, I'm terrified of them.
No, it wasn't going in that direction. It was,
I didn't get the sense that it was. It's just my own personal.
yeah.
So, Trisha, do you have any questions for Elisabeth?
I do. I wanted to know, we talk about writing and the stumble blocks and everything else, but I want to know, do you have any hobby that you absolutely love doing, but you don't really excel at it?
Oh.
I mean, I love drawing, but I can't draw a straight line.
Well, not as such. I mean, I do like gardening and knitting and that sort of thing, and walking. But at the moment, I tend to put most of my energies into writing or just keeping the family going. But I do like to have a hobby, and I suppose at the moment, writing has filled that gap. Yeah.
Was it strange to have writing go from kind of a hobby to your career?
It happened quite gently. So I started cutting down on the teaching. I was only ever part-time. So the strange thing about it was I was surprised how much I missed work, really, because there's a lot of stimulus there. I had to get a routine where I was leaving the house and seeing other people and doing things.
It sounds so foreign now. You just leaving the house, seeing people,
I know,
doing things.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody thinks the same now. It's, you realise how valuable your outside home contacts are.
Yes.
I found that I think for me, and I'm sure it's probably the same for a lot of you, when I was going outside the house and seeing people and doing things, my writing time was much more structured because I had to make it be structured. Yes. And now that the days just go on forever and the weeks and the weekends are all the same thing, I'm finding my writing schedule is weird. It's different. It's not as productive as I thought it would be.
I think that's true. I think a lot of people have found that, and usually I hit deadlines pretty accurately, but I've just gone past my deadline a couple of times this time.
It's in the air.
I think a lot of people are struggling with that aspect of stimulation and structure really at the moment.
Well, and it's funny because I do know there are folks who, because their normal routine got changed, that's when they decided, I'm going to write that novel and I'm going to do that. So some people took 2020 shutdown as this is my opportunity and here's their book, and that's awesome. And I feel like for the rest of us, maybe who writing already was part of it, the things that we did, I know for me, I used to be able to write when my kids were in school, but when they're home and need me to help log them onto things, that just completely dried up. So trying to find those little moments to write just became these most precious, rare gems. They're
Yeah.
back now, so I have a
And
little
it's-
bit more time, but it made
It's
it.
hard to find the inspiration too when you're just home. You're just home and you're not seeing different things or having different conversations with a lot of people. So,
And I know for me, I don't like to write at home. And I know that's terrible because every time I go out, it costs me at least a cup of coffee. But to go and sit someplace else where there's nothing else, I'm not staring at a pile of dirty dishes or dirty laundry or things that get spilled. I can just use that time productively. And I know I've got this chunk of time before I got to go get little Mr. Naked usually from school. And I can do that. But now it's like, all right, well, they're always here or they're back home again. Was I supposed to be doing something? I don't even remember anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true. I like to write at home in the morning and then walk out to a coffee shop in the afternoon across the park, and I really miss that.
Right there with you. Or just getting to see people and have just the face-to-face interaction time. And I've had a few Zoom chats with people, and aside from our normal Zoom thing, because Trisha's in Pennsylvania and Jen's in New Hampshire, we weren't going to see each other anyway. But the people that I was used to having just a few moments of interaction with, those are just gone, and it just becomes really isolating.
Yes, it's strange how much that stimulation affects your brain, and just going for a walk affects your brain. So I think it is a different thing really in lockdown. You've got all this time, but it kind of slides into one big mass.
Yes.
Yeah.
When your writing time is the same time of doing dishes and taking care of a grandchild or a parent or another child, it's like it gets very slippery into, oh, I can just write in an hour, and then all of a sudden you're not writing in an hour, you're doing laundry again,
or you're looking at the computer going, words aren't happening here. I wonder why.
Well, that's when research is always fun. Like
yes.
Says the woman who's researched laundry.
I have researched laundry.
Excellent.
I mean, it was historical fiction. I had to.
Well, and I just love, Elizabeth, when you were talking earlier about getting to go and speak to people about their life experiences, visit the places. That's something I have nothing but admiration for, and honestly, just a little bit of jealousy, because even before lockdown, I was very limited about where I could go. So places, I would have to rely on my memory of places if I'd been there, or create or look online for research. And there were so many times when I just thought, do I have time to make the drive out to this place to see it myself? I don't have time. I have to just rely on pictures and rely on my memory. And for writers who get to go and like get that feel of the place, there's just nothing that replaces that.
Yeah, I think it's very stimulating, and it depends really how much the place is important to the book. So the last book, it was about the island of St Kilda, and it's quite tricky to get out there. It's quite a rough boat ride, and the boats quite often get cancelled. But I just couldn't have done that book without going there. But of course, I never visited the Warsaw Ghetto. It doesn't exist. It was completely flattened at the end of the war, and they even took the bricks away. And in fact, the whole centre of Warsaw was flattened. When you go there and see these beautiful old buildings, they were all reconstructed from plans and photographs, stone by stone. It looks as if it's been there for about 500 years, but it's new, 50 years old. So I think in some ways, there are places you can't go to because they're in the past or inaccessible, but you do sort of reconstruct them. Yeah, you reconstruct them.
Right. And when you're doing something where there was no, if it's imaginary, then no one can say, oh, that doesn't feel right, because the author is the one bringing it to life in the first place. But when you're dealing with a real place, how much accuracy you want to bring into, and if you can't visit it because it's not there anymore, then you're just trying to do your best. And I'm sure you did it absolute justice. And it's great to hear that the people who lived it can say, yes, that feels right, or it feels like the story told to me by someone who did live it. Yeah.
Of course, if you do write about a real place and you get it wrong, somebody will tell you.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So a fantasy world sounds quite nice.
Yeah. I know. I always try to say that it's a fictionalized version of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Or all plays I'll do things where I'll take a real place, but I'll be very vague about the details. Like there's scenes in my second book that take place in Las Vegas, and I never am specific about which hotel anybody's in or which services. So it's like there could be a lot of them, so no one can say, well, it should have taken them longer to do this, or that place doesn't have, because you know someone's going to do that. Someone's going to go, well, I stayed there, and it's not like that.
I was trying to figure out where everybody was staying in your book.
Were you trying to?
I was.
No, I made that. Sorry. I make it all up. And that gives you freedom to make things the way you want to be. And I hear some authors talk about, oh, are you allowed to reference real places? And some people don't know whether or not you're allowed to. And I don't mean places like the Statue of Liberty, but say an actual restaurant. And I know the rules some people say is just don't say anything bad about it, because you don't want the owners to go, my staff would never spit in your food or anything like that.
Yeah, you have to be careful, that sort of thing. You don't want to sort of libel suit, really.
No, you definitely don't.
Elisabeth, what are your favorite kind of books to read? Do you have time to read?
Yes, I think it's really important if you're writing to read, because that's where you learn your craft. And every time you read a book, you think, gosh, so that's how you do that.
Yes.
I think if you just read a lot, that's the best tutorial you can get. So I read a lot for research. I can see I've got books about Eskimos and whaling fleets on the basically I read everything. I read psychological fiction, romance, literary books, non-fiction. I think everything's, everything you read just inspires you in some way. So that's great fun. Yeah.
I love that you read beyond just one genre, because sometimes you'll hear people in certain genres either say, oh, I won't read this because it's not real literature, or it doesn't have good writing behind it, or they only stay in their own lane because they want to make sure that they've read everything out there. And I know none of us can. I mean, you always are hearing something come out going, well, this was the big book, I didn't get to it. Sorry. There are only so many hours in the day, and you can only read so much.
Yeah. Well, I think you can read different books. I mean, if you read a page turn and you're saying, well, how did you make me turn the pages?
Yeah.
Like, was it Gone Girl? I mean,
Gone Girl.
Yeah.
It's impossible to read that book and put it down. Like you have to. You have to stay up all night. She did a great job. It is the Pringles book.
One.
Exactly. And then recently I read Maggie O'Farrell Hamlet about Shakespeare and the son he lost. Yeah, that's quite a big book over here. And Hilary Mantel about Henry VIII, and you're just thinking, wow, that's how you can use, writing to really make things come alive. So I think everything you read is interesting in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I read
What sort of thing?
everything.
Yeah.
Like true crime.
It's a bit of a problem. Yeah.
Horror,
and
everything.
I was just going to say, one of the things I love about our show is that we've had writers on from so many different backgrounds, and just reading what they've done, or even seeing, okay, sometimes I can't read everybody's stuff, but I will look and just see the background that they come from. Everybody brings such different things. I love getting to see all these different styles and approaches even to the same genre. So bringing together, okay, these people both write science fiction, but their books were completely different. Getting to see all those, it's been amazing. And I know some people, they like their comfort reads, they like knowing what they're going to get, and they stay really in one narrow lane. And I'm glad that I don't read that way, because I think I'd get bored.
Yeah, and I'm part of an online writers group. Well, we were meant to meet in person, but this year it's been online. And in that group, we've got a crime fiction author, science fiction author, and 2 historical authors. So I think the process in some ways is always the same. I do love reading books about writing. I find that very interesting. So if I find a book about writing, I generally read that.
There's a beautiful book that recently came out, David Saunders. I can't remember the name of it, but it's his book about the craft of writing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's very, very good. And mean, I recommend Stephen King's On Writing, even to people who aren't
Yes.
writers.
Yeah, that is a great book.
It's
Yeah.
just because I know so many people I know, writers I know, say, "Oh, well, I don't write horror," and I'm like,
So
so what?
Okay.
neither does Stephen King half the time.
Neither does Stephen King.
Well, and Elisabeth, I wanted to ask, so from that crop of writers that came out of your master's program together, what genres were represented? Because I'm assuming you guys didn't all do the same kind of book.
It was either a literary fiction. There's one psychological thriller. They were quite mostly set in historical context, though. One lady was she's called Liza Klausman, and she did Tigers in Red Weather, and that was quite interesting. That was set in the south of France around a sort of Great Gatsby-esque atmosphere.
Oh gosh, you said two of my things that I love: south of France and anything Gatsby area. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I think it was sort of Ernest Hemingway and all that crew.
Yeah.
And when it was terribly glamorous down there, that was a great book. Yeah, so I think it generally tended to be either history or female-based literature. Yeah.
Was that an emphasis in the program that kind of steered you all that way, or was that just a product of luck that that's where the individuals in the program happened to be interested?
I think it's just a coincidence, really. I think history is quite interesting, and people tend to gravitate towards that. At the moment, I think the Second World War is very popular. It's just reached that point where it's far enough away to be something people want to learn about,
and also with like echoes with what's been happening currently in the political climate during.
Yeah, well, exactly. So because when I started
mirrors.
Yeah, that's very true. I started writing The Good Doctor of Warsaw, thinking this is, very old history. I'm having to explain, about anti-Semitism and things. And 10 years later, I was kind of saying, wow, I wrote that down and people are saying that now. It's like, I can't believe this has come round again. That's really, really unexpected.
Well, I think that just shows how important it is to be writing those, because as more people are reading them, it reminds us, because if we do forget these things and then we go, oh, this is a new thing. No, it isn't. And the more well-read we are as a culture, the more we'll be able to recognize these things in the early stages and address them before they get to the stage of World War II. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Well, I think there's sometimes when you're writing, there's a feeling of sort of hanging on to something before it's disappeared. So with The Doctor of Warsaw, I felt if I didn't get the story down with Roman's help, it would be lost.
Yeah.
So there was that. Yeah.
It's like capturing lightning in a bottle, but the lightning being a bit of our actual history.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Oh. So on that note, because that was so beautiful and that gave me chills again, thank you, Elisabeth, for being here with us today. Thank you. We got some comments from Marilyn and Carrie. We did see them. Both of them said Marilyn's was, that sounds so fascinating about your book about the island and the Inuit people. And then,
thank you.
And then Carrie, I couldn't quite read Carrie's. I think it was just another very complimentary, exciting thing, something fascinating. I don't have my glasses on, so sometimes when comments pop up, I'd have to like lean in really close to the screen.
Yeah, I'm usually your seeing eye dog because I do wear my glasses.
I know,
but sometimes we're in the middle of a sentence and I don't want to cut off anyone to be like, this person said you're awesome. What it is. If it was a question, I would have made sure we got it in.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed
meeting lovely. I did not do a weird English accent the entire.
We're very proud of you, Jen.
Entire show.
Thank
you.
Amazing.
I know. So I went to school for theater a million years ago, and every once in a while, my tiny Tim just bursts out, or like a laundress from a Dickens book. So I held that in, and I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of you, Vox Vomitus Vixens, for being here, getting up early, Allison.
I was awake. I was up. I just needed a second cup of coffee to look like I was up.
Uh-oh, that's a lot of words. I'm not going to be able to read them.
Elisa von Schulman says, thank you, Elizabeth. You are so delightful to listen to, and I'm excited to check out your books. And lovely to see you as always, Vox Sixons. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and I want to thank my Roman Sorotin, our producer, and my husband. I'd like to thank our executive producer, Pam Stack. This has been a copywritten podcast by Global Authors on the Air. Stay tuned this Wednesday, where we are going to have Greta Kelly. That's at our normal bat station. I'm trying to remember this phrase. That is at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday. And also stay tuned. Thursday night is the return of Writers Showcase after its multiple month hiatus. I will be your host next Thursday night on Writers Showcase, and I will be talking to Mr. Paul Tremblay. So lots of cool writers next week. And thank you, everyone. And we love you. And goodbye.